as a woman coming up in corporate America wasn't particularly easy. It was always, you talk too fast, you go too fast, you think too fast, go slower. What are you doing? You don't understand women, like all this garbage. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm 55. I'm really good at what I do. If I'm going to do it again at this point, I'm going to do it my way.
That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Carey. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post 9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists, and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills. Episode 95 features Jennifer Sey, an elite gymnast, a successful marketing executive, and the founder of XXXY Athletics, the only athletic brand that stands up for women's sports. Welcome. This is Veteran Made. This episode is brought to you by Go Pills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time. All right, we are live and recording. We've waited the appropriate amount of time on Riverside. Jen Sey, welcome to Veteran Made.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Very, very happy to have you. Yet another former athlete to come into the building and have a discussion. So I'm really excited about that. On that note, if you could just give us a brief primer on your kind of athletic background, your executive background, and we'll jump into the business.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll hit the top line. I was an elite gymnast as a child and adolescent in the 1980s. I was a 7-time national team member and the 1986 national champion. I left the sport, despite my successes, fairly beaten down and broken, both physically and mentally and emotionally. It's kind of a brutal sport. I think people have learned a bit about that in the last few years. I went off, left it behind, didn't do it in college, went to college, kind of tried to figure out what I was going to do with my life because I'd basically spent my entire childhood focused on sports and, didn't have a lot of other interests. So that took me a second to figure out. Graduated from college in 92, went into the workforce, found my way into the fashion business, eventually spent 23 years at Levi's and worked my way all the way up to brand president. I left there in 2023, and now I am starting my own apparel brand called XXXY Athletics. That's the short version. There's lots of intrigue in between each of those chapters.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to jump a little bit kind of back to not the very, very beginning, but your initial transition out of sports and into I'll say it in a funny way, real life, right? Like my wife played college golf. And so when we go play golf together now, she's has a great time playing golf, but closely removed from her experience playing D1 golf. She was like, I don't know how to have fun out here. Like, you know what I mean? So what was that initial, what was that like for you coming out of gymnastics and saying, all right, I'm going to go embark on college and something else?
Well, it was really hard. I mean, I left the sport, like I said, completely broken. I mean, the last 4 or so years of my coaching, it was incredibly cruel. It was emotionally and physically abusive. I was lucky to escape without being sexually abused, but there were sexual abusers everywhere on my coaching staff at my private club, the national team coach, like we all knew who to avoid. I trained on broken bones. I trained on a broken ankle for 2 years. That didn't go well for me and continues to not really go particularly well for me. Those injuries you carry with you into life. And it was just really emotionally abusive. And so when I left the sport with all this success under my belt, I really felt like a loser, which is unfortunate because I should have felt pretty good about what I'd been able to achieve. Not only that, but I had no idea what to do next. So I didn't want to do the sport anymore. I couldn't do the sport anymore, but I had no idea who I was without it. Because I had been, I started when I was 4. By the time I was 10, I made my first national team. I was training 30, 40 hours a week for my kind of my teen years. And like, I just didn't have any clue who I was without it, but I knew I couldn't do it. So like, what do you do with that? And, I was a bright kid, but school was just something I got through to get to the gym. And I, only went to school for half a day. I was training 6, 7 hours a day. And so I hadn't developed my academic interest. And here I was, I went to Stanford, which is amazing. And I had zero curiosity or sort of like, I, I didn't know who I was academically, intellectually. And so that's what I was trying to figure out. When I got to Stanford, it's this amazing place, right? Or I should say was, I don't know if it is anymore. It's this amazing place where you have these very high level athletes as well as, incredibly smart people. And I was living in a freshman dorm with a range of athletes who went on to become professional baseball players, professional football players, professional tennis players. Our training up until that point had been the same. And arguably I was better than they were. I was the national champion. And yet I had no option going forward. And they were going to make this their career. And I was sort of pissed about it because I was like, wait a minute, I spent all this time building a career essentially. And now I have to find something else and I'm exhausted. Like I felt like I was going to the old age home at 18, 19 in college. So I spent my time in college, I guess you could say rebelling, it had required such discipline and obedience. And I just wanted to let loose and not do the things that people told me to do what I wanted to do and figure out who I was outside of the sport. And so, but I didn't even really develop. I mean, I did well in college, but I didn't really develop my academic interest. But it's funny you mentioned your wife because I did take dance class in college. And a friend of mine who had also been an elite gymnast said, we're going to stand in the back and we're going to not pay attention. We're going to goof off and we're going to have fun. Like, you don't have to be the best one here. Nobody cares.
Right.
And that was really hard for me. But I had to figure out that I could have fun doing physical activities that sort of resembled gymnastics, but I didn't have to be so serious. And I didn't have to try to be the best one and impress the teacher. I was just like this good little girl my whole life. And so figuring out, and then for a long time, I just rejected any athletics entirely. I was like, I'm not going to stay in shape. And I gained tons of weight but I had to kind of figure out who I was, without the sport, and then realize like, I don't like feeling like garbage. I don't like being 40 pounds heavier than I should be. I need to find out what I love and that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I need to keep my body and mind in shape. And I also had an eating disorder. I came out of the sport where anorexia is sort of drilled into you, and I transitioned to bulimia, and that was no fun. So I had to overcome that. The 20s were rough going for me, I'll say. There's a lot of figuring out to do.
Yeah, I'll say that, it makes sense to be thinking about, wanting to experience either intentionally in some ways and unintentionally in other ways. You want to experience the other side of the pendulum, right? Because you experienced one side of the pendulum, and so much of that because you were so young for so long, like that was forced on you, right? You were just told this is how you have to operate in this environment. If you don't, you're not going to be successful. Right. You did that. You saw, elite levels of success, and then you're like, well, let me experience the other side of the pendulum here. And do you feel like that allowed you to calibrate yourself? Like, what tools did you draw on emotionally and intellectually, professionally to kind of find yourself and find your way?
Well, it's interesting. As wild as I got, and I won't go into the details, but as wild as I got in my 20s, I still maintain, I have this sort of innate discipline, ambition, competitiveness. Like, I got straight A's, but I didn't develop the intellectual curiosity that I think is very much a part of how I think of myself now. I didn't really develop that until after college. I learned how to get an A on a paper as efficiently as possible so that I could go out and have fun, basically. So, I didn't fully, that's who I am, and I am a disciplined and ambitious and competitive person. I tried to really set my competitiveness aside because I felt like that hadn't served me well. Mm-hmm. In one sense it did, because I achieved great heights. In the other, it like tore me apart. And so I tried to set that aside. And I learned somewhere in my mid-20s that I couldn't, that was who I was and that was okay. And I should embrace it. But I should also, maybe mediate it a little, not be consumed by it, have other interests and, compete with myself, which is really what I do the most, is try to get better than I was the day before. The hardest thing was overcoming the eating disorder. And that I really did by sheer force of will. I got more political in college, as many people do, and I discovered feminism, and I very enthusiastically embraced feminism. I know it's a term not everybody loves. I still embrace it. I think it's really simple. I believe in equal opportunity for women. I don't think there has to be. I know it has negative connotations on the left and the right, but I'm like, do you believe in equal opportunity for women? Okay, you're a feminist. And I realized that my values around that were completely at odds with my eating disorder, where I was sort of viewing myself and my value in how I looked. And I would never advise anyone else to do that. I would certainly not advise another woman to do that. And I sort of realized this somewhere around 24, 25. And I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. It's a waste of time. It's not who I am. And I just stopped. I stopped all of it. I thought, I'm wasting brain space with this. Like, I want to do all this stuff in the world. And I'm like maniacally recording calorie intake. What a waste of time and energy. And so I just stopped and I put it all aside, and that was it.
Man, that makes a lot of, and we'll get to what you're building now, but that anecdote right there makes a ton of sense. It kind of like a puzzle piece clicks into place, right? Even that early in your early to mid 20s, you kind of had that intellectual curiosity, but also that integrity to say, what I believe and what I'm doing, there's no alignment between what I believe and what I'm doing. So where did that curiosity come from? And then where did that integrity come from? Is that, might be an odd question, but.
No, it's a good question. I don't really know. I think, it was sort of after college really that I developed political interest, and I definitely was up until probably, a few years ago, I would have called myself left of center. I went to school in the Bay Area. We know the politics of the Bay Area. That very much aligned with my own. I moved to San Francisco in 1992, and it was like a dream. I always tell people, if you ever felt like a weirdo at any point in your life, San Francisco in the 90s was the place for you. You could be weird in any kind of way. And I was weird in a different kind of way than some of the folks, because I had just had such a strange childhood and I never felt like I fit in as an adult anywhere. So it was this perfect home with the weirdos. I got very engaged politically. I started to read more and more. I was reading more feminist literature, the old school and the new school. And I just started thinking about, why am I doing this? Like, I want to achieve. I've now put the sport behind me. I now am more confident in my intellectual capability and my professional capability, and I'm wasting time worrying about all this stupid stuff like the size of my butt and how many calories I take in a day. And so I just was like, this has to stop. I need to live like in alignment. I need to live my values. And I think it's a really interesting question. I had never traced it back to this. You're making me think about things like that sort of alignment of values and behavior. That may have been, in a very personal way, the first time that I did that.
Yeah, I mean, it transcends politics in every way. It kind of transcends ideology.
Problems, I was raised.
Oh, sorry. I think there was a lag.
Yeah, it's like, if these are my values and I care about these values, I've got to live up to them, or I've got to do my best to live up to them. And in that particular instance, that was about self-preservation, but also living up to my own stated values. I did put the eating disorder in the rearview mirror, but I continued to struggle in a lot of ways. And it took me a while to realize that it was very much the coaching that I'd endured. It was so emotionally abusive. The names we were called, hundreds of times a day. We were weighed in. It was announced on the loudspeaker. We were called a fat pig on the loudspeaker for the whole gym. Like, it's just like crazy, stupid garbage. And so that all really continued to affect me. And I had, anxiety and nightmares and all of these things. And eventually, and this is many years later, 15 years later, I'd already climbed the corporate ladder. I was a vice president already. I had 2 children, but I was really anxious, depressed, and had these nightmares. And I sat down to try to make sense of that. And I realized it was the coaching. I ended up writing a book. It was my first book, and it was called Chalked Up. And I spoke about the abuses in the sport, and I was the first person to do so. And that did not go well for me. in the public sphere. Um, it was really difficult. It was the very early days of social media. It came out in 2008. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't understand how cruel people could be. I don't think any of us did at that point in those early days of social media. But I really got dragged across the internet for a good 3 to 5 years for daring to call out these well-respected coaches as pedophiles and physical abusers. That was not fun.
Yeah, so for you, as you were thinking about that, I mean, you were just saying you weren't necessarily aware of kind of what kind of pushback you might receive, or what kind of treatment you might receive
Yeah.
on the back end of that. Did you still know that speaking out and telling the truth was going to have potentially those kinds of consequences, and you just looked at your dedication to what's true and living in alignment and say, I can't hide this anymore? Like, what won there for you, and why?
Yeah, when I loved memoir at the time, and I thought what makes a memoir interesting, I don't read them as much anymore, is very specific details into a world that perhaps I have never lived in, that I don't understand, but with broader themes that I can relate to. And so I thought, this is interesting. Like, people are always really interested in what this training environment, what it was like to be training at the elite level at 10 years old. I think I could tell the story in an interesting way, and I think it would have broader themes that resonate, because in a sense, it's a coming of age story. So I walk away from the sport and reject their definition of me. My coaches, even my parents at the time, to some extent, they've gotten past that as this, gymnast in a tiny little box. I was like, I'm more than that. I had to walk away from all of that. So in a sense, it's a kind of a classic coming of age story. When I sat down to write it, I was like, I'm just going to be as honest as I can be. I'm going to reveal things that are ugly that I've done. I'm going to reveal the ugliness in the sport, because unless it's honest, it's not going to be interesting. So that's really easy to do in your living room when you're sitting down. And I didn't really think it would get published. I wasn't a writer. Who knew if I was going to be able to write it? But then I wrote it, and a friend of mine read it who is a writer and was like, this is a book. You should send this around to agents. And I did, and she sold it. I got an agent, and she sold it quickly. And it was only at that point that I was like, oh shit, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse. People are going to read this. And I said all this stuff. So it was like, I just, you know what it is? I go one step at a time, and I don't think all the way ahead to that. And I thought the right thing to do is be honest. And then suddenly I actually was successful, and it's about to come out. And I'm faced with the fact that all of this is going to be said. But at that point, the ball is rolling, and, I'm like, it's the right thing. I mean, I didn't want other children to have to endure what I had gone through. And so I just went full steam ahead. Now, the backlash was intense. And at first I sort of recoiled a bit, and I, in defense of myself, I would say, well, it's not an indictment of the sport. It really is just my experience, my club. But as they came at me more, I thought they have something to hide, even more than what I know. And so I'm going to have to go harder. And I stopped doing that. And I said, it is the sport. The entire sport is rotten to the core. And I said it for 10 years until the Larry Nassar story broke, which, if your listeners aren't familiar with, he was the doctor for Team USA Gymnastics for 30 years, and he sexually assaulted over 500 athletes. So that broke around 2016. At that point, everybody said, oh, I guess maybe Jem was right. And then he's in prison for life now. So that's how that all went down. But I sort of my resolve strengthened with every step. But my intention is always to protect children and say what's true. It's kind of that simple. Those are the things I think that drive me.
Yeah, it's so interesting how, right. So two things kind of strike me, right? You were talking about sort of your identity as an elite 10-year-old gymnast, right? And it's one of the things my mom and my wife and I were actually talking about this last night in a slightly different capacity. One of the frustrating things about where the cultural conversation has gotten today in terms of identity and how you identify and what you identify as, and how important that is to you as a human. What's frustrating is there are elements of that are really important for us to negotiate with ourselves, with the world, and with the people in our lives, right? And so you coming out of an entire childhood as an elite gymnast and then realizing, well, you were that, but you're not that, but maybe you might still be that. And the only way to unpack that is actually to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Right. It's like, it's such an interesting thing that people just don't really do anymore.
Well, it also made me really realize that I had grown up in this microcosm where certain things were accepted. That was just the way it was. Like, that wasn't abusive coaching. That was tough coaching. You want to be a great gymnast? This is what's required. It was just, and you weren't to talk about it. It was like, the first rule about Fight Club, or whatever the club is,
Yeah.
the Fight Club. And you are convinced that that is normal. And then you step outside of it and you're like, wow, that's not normal. Like, now in college, I meet other people that weren't actually in this training environment, because everyone I knew was a gymnast and trained in this environment. I had no idea this was bizarre and abnormal. You step outside, you get some perspective, and you go, okay, that's not right. That is abuse. It's nothing other than child abuse. That's exactly what it is. And it just made me realize you can get caught up in these microcosmic worlds and not see things clearly. And it's really important to always try to step outside of it. And I think that applies to the political sphere today. You can get caught up in your tribe, and there's things that are required of you. And it becomes very ideological, and it becomes not necessarily grounded in truth. And so I think I really try to always stay outside of things a little bit so I can ask the right questions. But it's difficult because I had these, I don't have them anymore, but these tribes as an adult. I had my San Francisco tribe, my sort of hyper progressive girlfriend tribe. I had my professional tribe at work at Levi's, and I was there for 23 years. And that's like a really long time. It becomes very much a part of your identity. And it's hard to sort of try to maintain enough clarity to see things outside of whatever tribe you might be participating in. And it's hard to stand apart from it. Most people would rather stand with the group than stand apart and stand up and speak truth. And I realize that's not me.
Yeah, it's also the opposite of diversity, right? There's no
right.
diversity of thought. There's actually no diversity of experience, which means there's no diversity of background, which means any of the diversity that you are encountering in those tribes and groups is superficial at best, right? And so
Yes.
it's the antithesis, the antithesis, the anti-truth of that kind of approach.
Yeah, and San Francisco is like that times a million. I mean, I think the city is 96% registered Democrat or something. Like, it is. I don't like using the word progressive because I think there's a lot about the progressives that are like the opposite of actually progressive. But whatever it is, it's like far left of center, and it's just uniform thought. And I guess what I started to kind of feel in the late teens and then really suffered through in the early 2020s is you must align to every single tenet of their belief system, or you have to go.
Right. Yeah, I've got a group chat that with a couple of people on it that kind of during COVID, maybe it was like right before COVID, kind of during COVID, as all this stuff was popping off, one of my buddies sent us something, and we were all agreeing with it privately to each other on this text. And I was like, man, I guess this makes us really bad liberals that we agree with this thing. And then we changed the group text to that's the name of the group text. And it kind of like, it's a funny joke, but it's also a reminder of like, this is a place and this is a group where we share things that we find interesting, that we agree with, that we don't agree with. How can we challenge each other? How can we, but still maintain friendship and love and like all of those things, right? That we all grew up knowing to be true, and we still experience to be true, even if we don't necessarily see it.
Right. That's interesting. And so do you find on this chat, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you find on this chat that you all sort of have different views on certain subjects, maybe COVID, but you're able to kind of maintain connection and conversation?
Oh no, I lost you. Sorry. Can you ask it again?
Oh yeah. I just wonder if you find on this group chat, because that you have different views and different perspectives on things, but you're able to kind of converse there and still stay connected even when you disagree. Because what I experienced is in early 2020, I mean, I started questioning some of, the far, my party's, my tribe's beliefs in 19, but then in 2020, when COVID hit, right from the beginning, my husband and I in March 2020 were like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. This is harmful for everyone that these policies are claiming to protect. We're it's closed public schools while private schools are open, terrible for low income children, closed small businesses while big businesses are open, terrible for the small business owner. Everything basically was just terrible for the little guy. And I'm not the little guy. I was the chief marketing officer at Levi's at the time, but I just felt that these policies were so illiberal and so harmful, and that there was suppression of speech. There was one narrative, and I was outspoken from the beginning. And that is what really kind of tossed me out of my tribe. And so all of these friends that I'd had for many, many years, 10, 20, 25 years, suddenly I was persona non grata. I was not able to maintain. Now that was a crazy time. Everybody went a little insane, but we weren't able to maintain connection through my stand on COVID. My oldest friends, I don't have them anymore. So I'm curious if you are able to disagree and still maintain connection.
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes, right? Because I and obviously I know your story, and I've listened to you talk on other platforms before, and it always just breaks my heart because my wife and one of my best friends, who's an avid listener to this podcast, so he'll hear this. Like we joke about it, but it is really sad that people just lose. And we've lost friends. We lived in Brooklyn for, my wife lived there for 10 years. I lived there for almost 6. And, when the Antifa was trying to fight the guys in Charlottesville, and we were talking about all that stuff, I was like, well, no, the president didn't actually say that, what you're saying he said. And I don't really think what Antifa is doing is helpful. Like and I got called to my face a neo-Nazi and a Nazi sympathizer. And I'm like, well, we're done here. Like, we're done here. Like, I'm not going to interact with that. Like that's a non-starter. And so some of these other friends that I've been able to maintain, and what's amazing actually about the military veteran community is that, oh, did you lose me? Were you there?
I lost you for a sec. Go ahead.
What's great about the military veteran community is there's a ton of diversity of thought and experience within our community. And some of the best political, cultural conversations I've had are on deployment with people that are from other places in the country that I had no experience with. I learned a ton from them. They learned a ton from me. And it was kind of shared experience. So that's something I love about this community in particular. And then with my civilian friends, we are able to maintain what you're describing. And that's because we have the same thing that you have, which is a commitment to what's true. I'm going to change my mind if I'm presented with something that is true, or something that I thought wasn't true, or vice versa.
I would have thought that my friends had that same commitment, but I learned quickly they didn't. And I also think this is probably not. I think women can be meaner and a little less tolerant, and I think women, by and large, drive cancel culture in many ways, and that's how they sort of flex. My group was largely, female friends, not entirely. And in fact, the male friends I still am close to.
Yeah. I mean, with my wife and this particular friend, we always, the refrain we always say is, your politics is the most boring thing about you.
Totally.
You have to have them because you have to vote and you have to be an engaged citizen. But outside of that, it's boring. I don't want to talk about that. I want heart to heart. I want mind to mind, Yeah,
I lost you a little again, but I agree. Politics is the most boring thing.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand why it wasn't always like this. My cohort, we did largely agree politically, but it was like, if there were things you kind of weren't perfectly aligned on, it was okay. That is not okay anymore. My experience is that it's largely from the left. That's where my friends are, that you have to kind of line up, and it's changing at such a rapid pace what it's okay to think. I don't even know how you keep up with what you're allowed to think and say, and what words are acceptable and what words aren't. So I've just decided I don't want to really be part of any group, and I'll just sit over here by myself and say what I think. Not by myself. I'm married. I have an awesome husband. I have 4 children. I do have a few friends. But not mostly, not old ones for the most part.
Yeah. Well, I just want to tell you, like, that's a real bummer. And I'm sorry that you've had that experience, because it can't be easy. And, I've kind of arrived to a similar spot for in different ways. I grew up fairly conservative, and my way into classical liberalism was through libertarianism. So I was, grew up conservative, still maintain, a lot of those beliefs and traditions and things like that, but then became a libertarian, and then kind of discovered this classical liberal approach through the whole crew, all the people, right? Barry Weiss, Jordan Peterson, Steven Pinker, and you, and all these others, the folks that I've been consuming and listening to for the last half a decade or so. So all of this seems like a really interesting preparation for you to start this venture. Can you tell us what XXXY is? And then can you tell us what was the genesis and what made you say, I'm going to go build this?
Yeah. It was tough. I always liked working in an established brand, an established company. I liked it. I liked the support of that. I never want, there are people that are just entrepreneurs. They just are. That wasn't me. I saved my sort of entrepreneurial spirit for things I did on the side. I've written 2 books. I actually made a documentary film between 2018 and 2020 while I worked at Levi's. It's called Athlete A. So I did all these things while I had a full-time job. And it's like, I liked the structure, of stepping into a role that was kind of defined, a brand and a business that was. But I left Levi's. I resigned in 2023 and I took a little break. And as I started to interview again, in around 2023, I did a bunch of interviewing and I didn't want to step back in to well-established corporate culture. It's gotten more restraining, more dictatorial in terms of what you can say, what you can't say, who you can be. And even though I'd be stepping in if I were to do it at a very high level, a president or even a CEO, I just couldn't do that. I'm 55 years old. I'd spent my life in corporate America. As a woman coming up in corporate America wasn't particularly easy. It was always, you talk too fast, you go too fast, you think too fast, go slower. What are you doing? You don't understand women, all this garbage. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm 55. I'm really good at what I do. If I'm going to do it again at this point, I'm going to do it my way. So that was sort of the impetus. And then I started talking with friends. I met some folks here. I live in Denver that had interest in starting an apparel brand. And he had an idea, which I told him wasn't a very good idea. And I said, let me come up with an idea. I started talking to friends. And I came up with this idea of XXXY Athletics with the person who now is our creative director for the company. First of all, athletic apparel is the fastest growing segment of apparel, so it just makes business sense. But as I looked across at all the athletic brands that claim to champion women, support women, I found that they actually do no such thing. And in reality, they're all led by men. They all treat women, employees and influencers like garbage. This is well publicized for Nike in particular. And I thought, why shouldn't a women's focused athletic apparel brand be led by a woman, be designed by a woman, and stand up for women's rights and the protection of women's sports and spaces, which I see kind of collapsing right now as we kind of make the move away from sex-based rights to gender identity. So it's a little controversial, but I'm no stranger to controversy at this point in my life. 70 to 80% of Americans agree that women's sports and spaces should be protected. Women deserve equality of opportunity, privacy, safety, all these things. So most won't say it, but if I can make a cool brand, maybe they'll kind of join us in this fight. That was kind of where the idea came from. And we launched 6 weeks ago and it's going really well so far.
Yeah. I mean, it's really exciting. And so you knew that some controversy was coming your way if you did this brand this way. Did you steel yourself in any sort of different way than you had before for any of these other times that you had, or you're just you?
Well, I no longer need to steel myself. I did know it would be controversial. I don't think that's a bad thing. But let me just say, it should not be. It should not be controversial to say that men and women are different, both deserve equality of opportunity. It should not be controversial to say that male bodies are stronger and faster than female bodies. That is a truism that up until 5 minutes ago, we all would have nodded along to. And now suddenly we can't define what a woman is, and sex is on a spectrum, though there's never been any study that has actually shown that to be true. So I hold fast to the truth. Even if it's controversial, you can't get sucked into that ideology. Truth outs in the end. It was controversial when I said the national team coach throughout the 80s was a pedophile because you weren't supposed to say that, but he was. That was the truth. And because I said it, he was eventually banned from the sport. So that's a good thing. It shouldn't have been controversial to say that public schools should be open during COVID. The private schools are open. The rich kids are going to school. The poor kids are suffering at home. But it was. It's not anymore. I think we've recognized. So if you say true things, you just have to avoid all that noise. I don't get worried about it now because that's just, now I'm just used to it, I guess. But I did warn, I have a team, a staff. It's not huge. I have about 4 full-time employees and another 4 part-time. And they were worried and they kept saying, well, maybe there's a way we can say it that it won't make people mad. I'm like, there's not. We just have to say it. We have to stay in the light. We have to be positive. We're never going to be negative. We're never going to get into the mud. We're going to stay above it all, but there's nothing you can do to insulate yourself from the names that we will be called. That's a tactic to try to get you to stop saying it, but more importantly, to get others to never say it and never join you because they don't want to be called those names. I don't care anymore.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so I want to ask this question, and I want to be respectful of the folks that want to support the brand, that will support the brand, that would support the brand, but are also being very quiet publicly. What is the difference between, for you, why do you think more people don't put their money and their energy where their mouth is, like you are, to say, enough, I'm going to build a brand, or I'm going to go out publicly and do this, say this, be this? Why
do I think people don't do that?
Yeah.
Well, I think the easier question is, why don't people just say what they actually believe? Like, because starting a business is hard and not everyone has access to capital and all that stuff. So I'll put that one aside second. Why don't people say what they think? Because they're afraid of being called these terrible names and getting canceled and losing their job and losing their friends. And most people would rather stand with the tribe, stay with their group, than stand apart and do the right thing. They just would. And that is not unique to us right now. During COVID, I was very frustrated. I was like, why are people like this? This is like, I thought there was something unique about people right now that was like uniquely weak-willed. And then I started looking back across time and history, and I realized this is just how people are. Every study, from the Milgram experiment to the Stanford prison experiment, most people are obedient. They'll do what they're told. If they get to wrap themselves in virtue while they do it, even if it's the wrong thing, they're even more inclined to do it, which is exactly what happened during COVID. You could yell at everybody, stay home to stay safe, and feel like the good person who was doing something. But the only people that could do that were the well-off who could afford to do it. So there was nothing kind or values driven about any of it. But most people took that stance or stayed quiet. I mean, I actually had a friend I was talking to about it the other day who came to visit, and he said, I pretty much agreed with you the whole time, but I was not about to say that publicly because I didn't want to lose my standing and my job. I mean, he said it. He had total self-knowledge. Most people don't have that self-knowledge. I think most people got very caught up and felt very virtuous. And so I think that's true for lots of things, for everything.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's like my friend Rob Henderson, coined the term luxury beliefs, right? It's like, that's what it is. Like, people want to have the correct belief. They want to have the virtuous belief, kind of regardless of what the source is. But to your point, anchoring to the truth, to what is true. And if you don't know what is true, anchoring yourself to the possibility that there is a truth to pursue. And so you got to just move your way forward to it. That's the way.
Yes. And that there is value in pursuing truth, and that there is I hate the phrase "my truth." I hate it. It makes me scream when people use it. I think it started to be used most often during Me Too. I blame the feminists, of which I am one, for the use of this term. And in fact, I have many friends who are Nassar survivors, victims. They were using my truth. And I said, you have to stop using that. It's the truth. He assaulted you. He abused you. You were a minor. That is not your truth. That is the truth. So I think that's dangerous terminology, but that's a total aside. I just finished Rob's book, actually, and I'm very familiar with his thoughts. And I think COVID policy, which he doesn't generally use as an example of luxury beliefs, but COVID policy is, I think, the epitome of luxury beliefs, where you had people, some in my own family, screaming about the schools needing to be stay closed, and you're anti-teacher, you're against the teachers unions, you're anti-union. Meanwhile, they're sending their children to $60,000 a year in-person private school. So this policy, which was devastating for a generation of children, they could advocate for it where it is virtuous while evading it and sending their own kid to in-person private school. So feel none of the pain of what that policy was doing to regular kids across the country in public schools. That to me was like, it epitomizes, I love the phrase, it epitomizes it. He usually uses other examples, but I think that's one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I liked what you said earlier. Like you're talking about building a business because it makes business sense, right? You wanted to keep working, you want a job, you want to generate revenue, you want to have that purpose in the professional side of your life. So you're looking at the market and saying like, oh, okay. Like, I mean, look, I'm wearing Viore, like head to toe, right? Like athletic wear, athleisure is, like you said, what it is. And so you're looking at this not just as like, oh, I'm going to be anti-woke and start a company to ruffle a bunch of feathers. Like, no, I want to make some money. I want to build a business. I want to work with the team. I want to lead the team. But I also want to do and say what is right. And so that gives this audience and this consumer an opportunity to say, oh yeah, I can latch onto that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yes, it's both things at once. I think I want to I talk a lot in my book about normie capitalism and how we need to get back to normie capitalism, disciplined financials, outstanding product, marketing that is, uniting and inspiring, versus all of this, for lack of a better word, kind of woke virtue signaling, woke capitalism, where you have brands taking these, very far left stances, aligning themselves with everything from BLM to HRC and everything in between, while at the same time pretending to be pro-worker. At the same time, you see, CEO salaries have increased like, I can't remember the number. I used to know it. It's in my book, a gazillion fold, over the last 20 years. And, you have companies laying off workers during COVID, when the really humane thing to do would have been to advocate for businesses to be open so that people could have their jobs and work. And so there's this sort of hypocrisy. I'll use Nike as an example. Women's History Month campaigns, championing women, all of this. Meanwhile, the headlines would indicate that they have, widespread sexual harassment within the company. They don't pay pregnant athletes, and they abuse female runners in their now defunct Oregon running project. So they treat actual women like garbage, and yet they do these campaigns, sometimes that feature males like Dylan Mulvaney, to celebrate women. There's a gap, a distance between what they say and who they are. Some people have argued with me that, this brand and this company that I've started is at odds with what I've said in terms of businesses getting back to basics and normie capitalism. I would argue, no, it's not. We are disciplined financially. We make outstanding product. And I think our marketing is elevating and uniting. And the fact is 80% of Americans agree with us. This very simple thing, that female athletes deserve to be celebrated and championed. They deserve equality of opportunity, and they deserve privacy and safety. That's a really basic thing. It gets coded as right wing, but I'm not right wing. So it's truth. It just, they code it that way, the left, as right wing, so you stop saying it and you don't get other people to join you. But we already have the vast majority of Americans that agree with us. We just need to coax them out of the shadows to say it, so common sense can return.
Yep. I mean, completely agreed there on the cultural front. In terms of the business front and the economic front, what you mentioned earlier, that you said I wasn't like necessarily entrepreneurial minded. I didn't necessarily want to jump in and be an entrepreneur. So what was that experience like for you to transition from corporate America to building your own thing?
It is. I'm having such a blast. It's so much fun. I like the doing. And when you become an executive in a large company, you end up sitting in boardrooms and executive team rooms for days on end, and you are making PowerPoints and reviewing PowerPoints, and you're talking about who gets laid off next, and, re-architecting the future. And you get very distanced from the product and the content of the marketing. And so for me, and I think I'm unusual, I wanted to get my hands dirty again. And so for me, it's a lot of fun to pick the colors for the season and to choose the right zipper and the right buttons and the right softness of fabric and to write the SEO copy. I don't think any one of my peers, and I don't mean just from Levi's, I mean executive peers from major companies across the country, want to do the in the weeds work that I'm doing. But to me, I can't really imagine doing anything else. It's a lot of fun for me. And I love building brands, and brands get built by all of those little choices. Every tiny choice adds up to how you make a brand great. And so for me, I don't know, it's fun. We'll succeed or we won't, but I'm certainly going to have a good time.
That's one of the great things about being an entrepreneur is you have that opportunity. And like, for our community in the military, you go through your progression, your rank progression, and then your kind of like level progression of what kind of job you're allowed to do. And at some point you're going to achieve a supervisory role that will not allow you to go and actually do the job.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur, has its own set of challenges, obviously, but you actually do get to do the work. So what's it like for you? Like, let's get nitty gritty. What's it like for you to write copy and work with your copywriters and your creatives to like actually do that?
Oh my God, I love it. And now, I used to always sort of try to do it at Levi's, but at Levi's, I had a creative team of like 80 people internally. And I would say, oh, how, maybe talk about the product this way. And there was a team of 20 copywriters who were like, no. Now, I mean, I have one creative. We work together. He's also a writer. He's like, I write things and I say, what do you think of this for our next email? And he's like, it's great. I'm not rewriting it. You already did it. So, there's just not that many of us. At this point, I've written, 2 books, as well as a documentary film, Athlete A, and I have another documentary film coming, and they do require some writing. And so, my team is excited to have me do as much as I want to do. I think sometimes they feel bad. They're like, oh my gosh, you're so in the weeds. I'm like, this is what I love. It's fun. Everyone is willing to go the extra mile. I mean, our first, we launched on March 25th, and I have this amazing colleague named Josh, who's like head of operations. And he really, like, as much as I like the details, there's some stuff I just can't do or I'm really bad at. And he's good at all the stuff I'm not good at. But in order for us to launch on time, our product shipment was delayed. He literally flew to Peru and carried product back in a very large few bags. We're just willing to do it. Everybody's really passionate about it. And so it's tons of fun. I can't really imagine sitting in a boardroom and reviewing PowerPoints all day at this point in my life. I want to be in it. And somebody said to me, I think it was just yesterday, when you start your own thing, like the highs of the good days are so much higher than, what you ever experienced working for somebody else. And the lows are lower too. And you really I feel a real responsibility to the people who chose to come on this journey with me. And to associate themselves with me, which could make them professionally toxic elsewhere. And they've chosen, they believe in us, they believe in me, they believe we can do this together. And so I want it to work for them,
Well, yeah, absolutely. I left the ad agency world, going up on a year ago, and just started my own shop. And with my wife and I co-own the shop. And so I feel you. Yeah, the highs are higher, the lows are lower. But that's the kind of life that I want to live professionally, and that's the way that I'm built. What reference points do you use for leadership in this kind of small unit way that you have now with this company? And what did you pull from your experience in corporate America, and what have you adjusted?
I think I'm sort of the same. I mean, I'm very calm always. I think some of my friends from Levi's used to joke, in 23 years, no one ever heard me yell. I don't yell. You'll know if I'm disappointed or frustrated, but I never scream. I don't think that's ever the way to get the best out of anyone. I believe in bringing people together with very different skill sets and ways of thinking to solve problems. I feel like it's my job to create the conditions that kind of environment can exist, and we get to the best answers together. I did that in my time at Levi's as the CMO, as well as the brand president. I'm doing it now. It's just a smaller team. I never want to be the kind of coach that I had in gymnastics. That is a guy, that's like that's a stake in the ground for me. I think you get the best out of people when you're supportive and when you help them learn to solve problems on their own versus always solving it for them. And so I think I'm the same. It's just different scale, different scale.
Yeah, I think that makes up. These things scale up and they scale down. Excuse me. I think that makes sense. They scale up and they scale down, right? It's just about a matter of execution.
Yeah, and I try to set the right example. It's not like, I get to do this, but you have to do that. Like if somebody's gonna carry product back to sell, like I'm gonna be willing to get my hands dirty too. So I think you want to just sort of set the right example. Like I'm in this with you. We're doing this together. We're always respectful, but we do also say like, say what's on your mind. One of the commitments we made to each other is we don't get offended. I don't want an organization that people are afraid to say what they think, because I think you cannot get to unleash creativity and innovation if people are afraid to talk because they might say the wrong word. Now, half of us in the company have been canceled in some way, shape, or form. And so we all kind of hold this belief together, and we want to just be in a place where we can say what we think, but we're all different. We all have different backgrounds. Some of us are, from larger companies, some much smaller companies. Some of us are religious, some of us are not, some of us are lefties or former lefties, some of us are not. So we do have very different backgrounds, but not being offended is our sort of core value, I think.
Yeah, I think you'll have there's a lot of similarity there with the military community, that you don't really have a chance to get offended if you're just telling the truth as you see it, and having a conversation that way, especially when it's geared towards solving a problem in the marketplace, right? If it's a marketing problem, if it's a sales problem, if it's a procurement problem, if it's an operations problem, right? Those are the things that you got to tell the truth as you see it in order to arrive at those solutions. And if you don't tell the truth and you are afraid to say the wrong thing, then you might not actually arrive at the solution. Okay, so yeah,
exactly.
I want to be respectful of your time. We've got about 8 minutes left here. Where can folks find you? Where do you want to drive traffic? Where can folks? Obviously, we'll link out the website, and e-com and all of that good stuff. Where do you want to drive traffic for sales, and what's coming up? Anything that you want to plug or chat about on the business front?
Yeah, so our website is xx-xyathletics.com. The easy route to get there, we have sort of a vanity URL, is thetruthfits.com. So that'll redirect you to our site if you just put in thetruthfits.com. I think the exciting news we launched March 25th with a pretty narrow assortment, more casual cotton basics. In 2 weeks' time, so the end of this month, we'll be launching all of our performance products. So leggings and bike shorts and moisture wicking fabrics and tees and tanks for him and for her and all that stuff. So definitely come check that out. May 31st, June 1st, whole new range of products. So our assortment will expand exponentially at the end of this month. That's what's exciting. I am, by my own name, Jennifer Sey, across all socials, most active on Twitter, and you can find out more stuff about the brand there.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exciting. We'll link all of that out for our audience to go check out and grab some apparel and grab some gear. And yeah, we're active on Instagram and Twitter /X, whatever we're calling it these days. So we'll put some content out that way as well. And we'll post. I'm very excited. So Jen, the last thing that I do at the end of every episode, I ask an open-ended question, and it is geared towards the military veteran community, but I want you to answer it however you would like to answer it for yourself. So the question is, what's on your heart and your mind for our community right now? Could be a piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, or something you want to reiterate from what we've talked about today. But what's on your heart? What's on your mind?
What's on my mind is we need more. We need to get back to a culture of open dialogue, free speech. We can't be afraid to say true things. We need to live in material reality. We cannot let ideology overcome truth, and that's on us. That is on us, each of us as individuals. I met an amazing group of women last night at a rally. They're challenging sorority policies that relate to these issues of gender ideology. They're incredibly brave young women. I certainly wasn't that brave at 20 years old. They give me hope for the future. They're fearless. And so, what I am most passionate about is getting back to a culture of freedom of expression where we can all talk to each other and say true things and search for the truth together. That's what I fear the most right now, is the censorship, the self-censorship, the social censorship. So I just think the best way to overcome that is to set the right example and encourage others to do the same.
Amazing. I think I lost you towards the tail end there on that, but completely agreed. Jen, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for the apparel, and thanks for the energy in this direction culturally. And yeah, hope we can do this again sometime.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Carey.
Cheers.